Hello everybody, welcome to the Hyperlocal Newsroom Summer Academy. I'm really happy to be here. I was in on the early thinking about this when Brooke Kroger came up with this idea and explained it to me a little bit, and it's really great to see it come to fruition, and I welcome you all here. You're really part of a big experiment, and that's what I want to talk about today. Explain to you how you fit in with the entire world of an evolving journalism frontier. So I want to talk about that. When the other day I said to Brooke, well, what am I going to talk about? What do you want me to do? And she told me that, well, the activities here are divided up into vegetables and dessert. And I'm a vegetable. And I said, well, what vegetable am I? She told me I was an eggplant, so just, I'm an eggplant. So I'm going to talk about, you're going to have to eat your vegetables today. That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about journalism. So I've been a journalist since I was 17 years old, and I have to say that doing this for 37 years, and you guys do the math, I just could not have asked for a better career and a better life. I've had the most extraordinary experiences. I've met amazing people. I've worked my butt off, as that's the nature of this business, and you don't make a lot of money either, but I find every day I learn something new, and it's just a treat. I always say that other than my children and my husband, my biggest blessing in life is that I knew very young what I wanted to do, and that I am able to do it. And you can't put a value on the fact of the idea of going to work every day and loving what you do. I grew up around here, and I managed to work in New York City for most of my career, most at the New York Daily News. I was there for off and on for 17 years, and when I left there, I was a city editor. I went to be the managing editor of the New York Observer, and then I went to the New York Times, where I've been almost 10 years now. Most of the time I've been at the Times, I've worked on the Metro desk, and I did a short stint in Styles, which wasn't quite my thing, and then I did politics, which I'll talk a little bit more about during the 2008 campaign, and then I wound up in hyperlocal land, and this has been, of all the assignments I've had, from even the Obama campaign and McCain campaign to being the first woman police bureau chief at the New York Daily News, I don't think there's anything that has engaged me and excited me more than this project, and I think that we are on the cusp of something really interesting, and you guys are now all a part of it. So when I started in the newspaper business, we actually did have computers, okay? They were called word processors then. We actually still did have some typewriters too, but we were already on computers. And most of the time, what we did was process words, that's all, and put the paper together through digitally over time. And then we all started websites, and we still started figuring out what we were going to put on those websites. And originally, most newspaper websites were just a digital version of the newspaper. You took whatever stories were in the paper and you put it on the web. And then as the technology evolved and as people started to grasp the possibilities of this medium, there became more of an interactive feature. Blogs came about, interactive graphics, video was incorporated, all the things that you're learning in this summer academy gradually were added. And it's been a huge transition for newsrooms to traditional newspaper newsrooms. And even from what I hear from my colleagues, broadcast newsroom, to get their head around, okay, so what do we do on this thing called nytimes.com? How do we update it? The reporters, I have to file a story. I can't worry about the web. And when I was on the 2008 campaign, we sort of had a huge transition at the New York Times. We had a real lively, wonderful website, but there was still a divide between newspaper people and web people. And it was actually physical right before that, where all the web people were in a different office. So what we did at the Times in 2008 was they created, in 2007 actually, created a separate desk called Politics Desk, excuse me. And we acted independently from all the other desks, but it consisted of a number of editors including one who was an editor slash for the web. And all day long we edited, all of us though, edited for the web as well as for the newspaper. And it became this seamless thing where at first the reporters were like, as I said, I can't file, I don't have time. But then they started to realize, as they started putting posts up in caucus and would get response and then see how much was bouncing off the news and the posts of the day, not only on our blog, but on all the other blogs out there, they started to realize, wow, we're having a very lively conversation here, and I want to be part of it. I don't want to just be that, 1,500 word story tomorrow morning. Excuse me, I warned you. Excuse me. So we would, so I would edit caucus, as would my colleagues, post for the caucus. I went out on the trail a little bit covering John McCain for a few days just to fill in for a reporter. And I filed all day to the caucus as well as newspaper stories. And we showed the newsroom that this could be done. Another one of my duties was to take the caucus column during the day, boil it down, and we ran a daily column in the newspaper called The Caucus. So that sort of summarized the best items. And so that was, we were taking things off the web, putting in the newspaper, taking newspaper stories, and it was no longer just taking newspaper stories and putting them on the web. And very quickly, it started to spread throughout the newsroom. We did some reorganization. Now, in the end of the campaign, a lot of us were sitting around on that politics desk saying, oh no, what are they going to make us do next? Because we had such an amazing experience covering the campaign at the conventions. I ran the New Hampshire bureau. Most of my colleagues went to Iowa. We just had an amazing experience. And I went to Washington and did the inauguration with the Washington bureau. I was approached by John Landman, who was the editor for digital, all things digital at the New York Times. And he said, I want to talk to you. Come on in my office. And he said, I'm going to try something new, and I want you to be the editor of it. And what he was talking about was Hyperlocal. Now, I had my head in the campaign. I had no idea that this conversation was going on in the world of journalism about hyperlocal. So much so that AOL had started this thing called Patch, and that they were going to start a whole network of it. I knew nothing of this, but he explained to me what he wanted me to do, and I went away, and it took me about 2 seconds to realize, absolutely, I want to do this. And the reason was, first of all, I had covered these big stories, front page stories, big issues. And I kind of felt a little bit like, I don't want to just go back to editing, little daily stories. It sort of would be a letdown. But more importantly, what would be more interesting than to go from like this global, 3,000 feet view to, really micro, looking down very close to the ground and really being part of the community. And that's the key word. And it took me a while to really get it, too. But what we're doing is all about community, and I want to talk about that a little bit more, but I'll tell you a little bit structurally how it was set up. So on March 2nd, 2009, a little operation, 3 people, me, Andy Newman, who was the chief blogger, and he's a reporter for the Times, and was a chief blogger for the Fort Greene, Clinton Hill local, and Tina Kelly, who started a local in Maplewood, Millburn, and South Orange, New Jersey. Both sites were randomly picked. We picked Maplewood, New Jersey, because Tina lived there. And we picked Fort Greene because Andy lived in Park Slope but didn't want to do another blog about Park Slope because it's overwritten about. So he wanted to do an interesting community, and I'm really happy we did Fort Greene and Clinton Hill. It's a real dynamic place, and we've had a great experience there. I feel like I'm part of the community now. So we discovered how difficult it is to do a daily news blog that covers a community. It is, the 3 of us, I would edit every single post that went up from both sites. That kept me glued to the computer day and night, which I'm certainly not complaining about. It was fascinating, and I loved doing it. Andy and Tina would do as many as, as few as 4 to about 9, sometimes 9 posts a day each, for their sites. And they included, though, posts that were done by community members. we found when we went into these two communities two reactions. One was a lot of resistance to the New York Times coming in and bigfooting and being, you know, this huge, powerful presence, you know, and stepping on neighborhood bloggers and maybe putting them out of business. But both of our bloggers were so good about linking and promoting other sites and other news and just kind of reaching out in general, being very collegial, that a lot of that dissipated because what the bloggers saw was that we were driving traffic to them because we would link to them. And so that went away fairly quickly. The other reaction we had was, I want to write for this blog. Now, a lot of the reason people want to do that is because they want to say they're associated with the New York Times. But we found that people really had these hidden passions, either to take photos, or to do reviews, or to write about a certain subject. Some people were essayists, write about themselves, or art. People loved art, and they really came to us with all sorts of ideas. Our goal was to make this a community hub, a site where people, we have a journalist steering the ship, but you're all on board, and the ship, you know, needs everyone doing something to make it work every day. And we honestly felt that from the beginning, and we feel that that part of our experiment was very, very successful. So our goal was to get as many of the posts each day contributed by the community as possible. And we had to kind of figure out, how do you do that? How do you get people to get involved? How do you get them to file? And what questions like, how much do you edit things that people in the community are submitting and doing for free? You know, how do you stagger, and how do you get people who do recurring features to file when you want them to? Because we decided that we do some newspapery things, like run certain things every week or every other week, so people had something to look forward to. Like we did this gardening column in New Jersey that was fabulous. It was a wonderful writer. She was a poet, beautiful writer, and she did this every Tuesday during the planting season. And it was more about poetry and beautiful writing than it was about, you know, how to plant your geraniums. It's very hard. People have busy lives. Most of the people, interestingly enough, never raise the subject of money with us. And we were not paying because this was a community site, and that's part of the experiment. I often wonder, if we did have a little money, how would it have changed the equation? How would, you know, would it attracted better people, more people? You know, what would have happened? It's still an unanswered question, and I think NYU is going to try to help answer some of that question going forward. We found that by September, now we launched in March, so 6 months down the road, 45 to 50% of our content was coming from community people, which is extraordinary. When I tell you we did, you know, the least number of posts was 4. We usually did 6 to 8 or 9 a day, and so that was pretty extraordinary. And I was editing community people, and you know, it was kind of a different experience than editing, you know, Adam Nagurney or Jeff Zeleny or chief political people. But it was also interesting because we had some very good talent. I knew that we'd reached a crucial point in the Fort Greene local when Andy decided on a Thursday, you know what, I'm tired, tomorrow I don't want to write, let's put up a post saying tomorrow's picture day, send us pictures from the neighborhood. And we did that, and here it is, was a Friday, and by 4 o'clock we'd gotten 50 photographs sent to us from just a little community blog. You have to understand, these are areas of like 50,000 people. And we were astounded, and in fact, it turned out to be one of the hardest days that Andy ever worked, because he had to put each of those photos in WordPress. We were stupid. We never thought, let's create a slideshow and just add the photos on the back end. So all day, you know, those poor people who were getting that RSS feed that day were getting pictures all day long. But anyway, it was a pretty extraordinary that we were able to attract that many people on a Friday to go out in the neighborhood. And some of the photos were wonderful, really wonderful. We had worried about fraud, and we had worried about tricksters. I don't think for the first 9 months that I woke up, you know, feeling strong and confident that what we were doing was not going to erupt that day into, it was going to be some kind of disaster. I was sure of it every morning. We had a couple of little problems, but really, I mean, one that I would say was more than a little, and the others were insignificant. And I mean, less than a handful of things that, and some of the errors that we made were things that we did that we just weren't thinking and posted things that we shouldn't have. So that surprised us. That's something that we learned. We learned that people want coverage. They want journalists in their community. They want you, and I've become convinced more than ever that journalism is a strong and thriving profession. I think that we still have to work out a few details like the pay model for it all, but I do think that people need journalism. They need journalists, and you know that when you go to the community and they tell you, here's this problem I have, I want you to write about it. We found anytime we covered news, people just gravitated toward us. We found that when we covered news, people were willing to send us stuff, photographs. We had an event in only 3.5 months after we'd launched on Father's Day. Andy Newman was supposed to be starting his vacation that week, and I would fill in for him when he was on vacation. So but he went into the Brooklyn bureau where he sometimes worked out of to just kind of tidy up and get everything cleared up so he can take a week off. And when he got there was a report of a building collapsed in Fort Greene. And so he quickly checked with the police, confirmed that something was going on, got verification from a number of sources that there were no injuries and things like that. Put up a quick post and asked people, what do you see, what do you know? That day, he updated the blog post all day long to the point where he was there till like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. And we got sent photographs, tips, names of people that were involved. Someone even found a Google photograph for us that we hadn't had time to look for, showing a crack in the building that collapsed. And so we put that up. It was just, some people had video from the street. And this post became this robust thing that really kept people in the neighborhood up to date. Andy went on vacation, and then we made sure we stayed on that story. We followed the people who'd been displaced. We got their story. What was it like? What went on there? We talked to the buildings department. We found landlords. Unfortunately, the building next door was undermined so much that they had to evacuate that building. We found the families who had 3 generations living in the building. They had to disperse. They didn't know what they were doing. We got them to write journals for us. And we told their story. Often journalists go to a scene of a tragedy and then they tell the story and they stay for 2 days and then they disappear. We were determined not to do that. And we stayed and we told that story over and over. That happened on several big news stories that summer. And I think more than anything, the idea of having a news source in the community, a credible news source, is what established the Fort Greene Clinton Hill Local and really has made us, have a steady, loyal readership. We've also have great features on there, and I think that we are trusted now in the community. Any of that initial hesitation about us dissipated very quickly. To continue the chronology here, though, by the end of that year, 2009, the New York Times decided that it was had to make some budget cuts, and we had been spared over and over and over while the business side was cut over and over and over. But there was an offer to buy out as many as 100 reporters, and if they didn't get the 100, there would be layoffs. So I was told, I really wondered whether I was going to have an operation anymore. Turns out I did, but it's a very different operation. Andy Newman was moved to City Room, where he runs the main blog for the Metro section of the New York Times. He's the chief blogger there because he'd done such a great job running this blog. And Tina Kelly took the buyout, and because she had another job, and they wound up getting 83 buyouts, and only 17 people were let go, which was the best outcome we could have hoped for, really. Anyway, so we had been talking all along and consulting with the City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism, and they'd been in on our meetings and planning and stuff, and so we went to them and said, listen, how would you like to run this blog for, and we'll be in partnership with you. And they embraced it, and they made it part of their curriculum, and they hired some people, put them in charge, and the students have been working out there since January of 2010. And at the same time, NYU, Jay Rosen had come to us with a proposal, a similar proposal. Hey, why don't we go in partnership and set up this site, and we want to do the East Village, and let's do it. And it took a while because we were so immersed in what we were doing, but in September we launched the East Village Local. Now, another thing we learned, and there's lots of lessons of the local I'm sprinkling throughout this, was it takes time to grow a blog. It not only takes long hours and dedication, but it takes time. People have to make it a habit. They have to know, and you have to do good work, so they want to make it a habit. You have to track them and keep them, so you have to keep doing good work all the time. And so it takes probably about a year and maybe more before people are saying, oh, let me check in and see what's going on on the block. Oh, I heard sirens last night. Let me see if the local is telling me what's going on. You got to give them that information. You got to be there. So it's been, the students have had an amazing learning experience. One thing we have both learned at both universities and at the New York Times is the issue of continuity is a real serious one, because you guys come and go, and you take a semester, and just as you're learning how to do it, then you're gone. So we went out, and CUNY has hired a fellow there, Mitchell Trinka, who is their regular reporter, who fills in the gaps and is, kind of keeps us moving, telling us what's new. And Stephen Brown is now on the East Village Local. Now, why does the New York Times do this? We don't have an ad on the page. We haven't made any money on this. I still spend probably half of my day working with the two universities and on the site. And yesterday I brought a couple of the contributors to the East Village in for lunch and a tour, because they're part of our team, and I wanted them to understand that they're part of our team. And we do this because this has been an amazing opportunity to learn about community. And community is the future of journalism. It's where we're all going. I've been saying for 3 years, we're in the middle of a revolution. And it's a media revolution, and we really don't know what's on the other side of that revolution. It could be horror, but I'm going to be optimistic. I think we're going to have not only a real good business out there, but we're also going to have better journalism. And the reason I say that is because now we have all these tools that we didn't have in the past, so that our readers, who are smart and interesting, no matter what your publication is, your readers know more about what you're covering than you know, because they live there, or they are, you're writing about, there's a nuclear physicist out there who's smarter than the reporter who's writing about nuclear reactors. So we now have tools to reach out to these people. Comments is a simple way to communicate, but email's another simple way. But we now have Twitter and Facebook. Reporters can put out questions, ask people to, I'm looking for someone who knows about such and such. And more reporters are starting to do this. And of course, there's the accidental Twitter communication, which is, Cairo, Tunisia, all of Iran 2 years ago, where we're gathering. The only reason we're finding out about these things is because we're monitoring blogs, Facebook, Twitter, and we're getting a lot of information. Of course, as I have told reporters and trying to explain to them why this is a good thing, you're still a journalist. You still have to verify, authenticate, make sure that you have two sources for everything. You're not just going to report that, somebody reports that, 22 people are dead in this town after a tornado. You're not going to write that just because you saw it on Twitter. But you'll see that on Twitter, and then you'll know, uh-oh, something happened here. Let me call, the local hospital, the police department, whatever I have to do, the National Guard, whatever I have to do to verify this. So I feel like, and there are more and more tools being developed so that there's a two-way communication between readers and the media. And I do think journalism will be better. First of all, we can correct things more quickly. I have to say, this morning, every night, the last editor on Metro, last copy editor writes a night note, and the night note says the last minute things they fixed and changed before they got in, put the paper to bed the last time before they went home, and that goes to all the day editors. So we get in the morning, we know what little changes happened after we went home. And you know, there were today on the day note, the night note from today, there were at least 2 things where a story was posted on the web, and in 2 cases, people who were involved with those stories called in and made real critical corrections. Now, we're not going to change things just because people call it in, but in this case, we verified that this thing needed to be corrected. We tweaked, as we call it, a couple little things. And so instantaneously, you know, things are improved already, right? You're not putting out there wrong information. You're being able to do in real time, you know, adjustments of information. We are one of the few newspapers that extensively corrects things to the point where people mock us for the way we do it. But, you know, still, it takes days for correction to appear on page 2 of the New York Times when, you know, maybe it was a story that was in styles and people don't read anything but the style section, so they're not going to page 2. So this is a really big improvement. Now, where you all come in is we have a lot to learn in the East Village, and we have a lot to do to serve the people of the East Village. There's a lot of great people here, great stories, and great news to be ferreted out. And your presence here this summer is going to help us find those stories, cover those stories, but also help us get farther along in building this as a permanent fixture in the community. And in the process, New York Times is going to be there. We're going to be observing. We're going to be asking you questions. We meet regularly with the faculty here. We exchange ideas. We're going to be trying new things, experimenting, and that everything gets used in some way. And that I'm going to bring you to where this all is right now for me. I am part of a new project at the Times, which builds on community. And all of the things we've learned in local, it's such a logical extension of what I've been doing that I can't believe they've actually let me have this job. And we're going to be building a new kind of community in New York, not built so much around geography, other than the fact that it's in New York City, but more built around a theme, which is education. And so that's what I'm going to be working on this summer, is getting a new site up that will have more interaction, more tools for the community to get information and be informed, and to give us ideas and to submit information. So all of this stuff we learned from the local. We learned by talking to community contributors. We learned from seeing the comments people write. We learned from going to meetups with them and hearing what kind of things are going on. And we're taking all that and regurgitating it. And one thing that I want to say is that a lot of people are watching. They're really curious to see what we're coming up with and what we're going to do. We've been anybody wants to call me and ask me about the local, I answer the phone and I answer all the questions. I speak about it all the time. We're very transparent. Transparency is another quality of principle of hyperlocal, but also of the web. It's just being transparent, telling people what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're coming from. So I'll answer anybody's question. So everything that you guys are doing somehow is going to get filtered out there, and it's going to inform the greater journalism community. By the time you guys get your first paycheck as journalists, whether you're on TV or you're a graphic designer or whatever you want to do in this field, you know, I think that all the things that we're doing here will be incorporated into what you do. And you're on the cutting edge. I want to ask you now for any questions.
My name is Taylor. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for coming here today. Well, my question is, even though I'm an NYU student and I'm here all throughout the year in East Villages where I live, do you have any tips on how to get us actually into the East Village? Like, instead of being an outsider, how do we get in, find out all the unique stories that we can cover, how to get the people in the East Village to invite us in and present to us, I mean, certain situations that we will probably not see that lying on the surface?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question, and it's something that we talk about all the time. because one of the other things that happens is students kind of land here like, you know, aliens from another planet, and they're looking around and everything is new and everything is different, and when you write it like that, it really annoys people in the neighborhood, because they're, you know, they expect you to have a certain level, but you can't. You're students, and it's the way. So I would urge you to do a couple of different things. One is reach out to your instructors, discuss stories with them, reach out to Stephen Brown, who's there as a resource for you guys to be able to run story ideas by, talk it through. The most important part of any story that you ever do is the conversation before you ever sit down and write it. And you should always seek out a conversation with an editor. And if you're not being given that conversation, don't stay at that job. Because that's very important, that you have that back and forth, so you are doing the best work that you can do. I love being an editor. I never wanted to be an editor. I loved being a reporter. I loved finding out things. Writing was so difficult and so painful that I didn't always love sharing it. I just wanted to know it. I didn't care if anybody else knew it, but that was my job. But I became an editor, and what I love is helping people be the best that they can be. And I don't care. I don't want the credit. I really love seeing something go from, you know, just get better and better and better through the process. So you need to seek out people who know. The other idea of getting the community to accept you is you have to, one of the newest things that a lot of old school journalists are grappling with is the journalist has to be more than just a person who goes and asks questions. Right now, and journalists hate this word, and I wish I could think of a better one, but in a way you have to brand yourself. And, you know, that's Twitter, Facebook, all those things, but more importantly, you have to be a marketer for yourself. So you have to be a representative and kind of go out there and assume people don't know about the local, assume they don't, and explain to them what it is. I know, did you get those cards from Brooke? Those, yeah, hand them out, explain to them what you're doing, explain the experiment, invite them to come in, invite them to email us. You know, let them know this is a community hub, it's open to everybody, you're just a conduit for the information. You will, and just do good reporting. Find good stories, people will then find you, because they'll know that you're someone that everybody has a story, and everybody wants to talk, and everybody wants to tell you about their life. So do good work, and you'll attract better stories. So those are all difficult things, and none of that is easy. But those are real ways to develop and make inroads. And maybe it's more difficult when you're a student, but everything I just said are good rules when you become a full-time journalist.
Thank you.
Who else has a question?
How will blogs ever be financially secure, I guess?
It's a really great question, because it is the heart of what we're concerned about. First of all, I think the good news there's good news for journalists in the inundation of information, in that you are there to translate that information, to help people get to the truth, to figure out help people figure out what they should be thinking. And verifying things, which, you know, a lot of bloggers and a lot of sites don't do. So the skills that you learn of reporting, authentication, verification, accuracy, fairness, balance, all those things are things that the internet is not particularly known for. So you bring a little bit of order to the internet just by bringing all those qualities to what you put out. And I really do believe that people are buffeted by so many lies, misstatements, but just, as you say, you know, deluge of information, that more and more they're going to realize, well, you know what, I don't know what to think. Let me turn to, you know, let me put the TV on and watch the local news and see what they're saying, you know. I'm not just going to follow the crazy guy in the corner who tweets all day anymore, you know. I'm going to find real sources. And that's maybe Pollyannish or optimistic, but I really do think that will happen. The other part about making money, there's the problem. There are a lot of people right now trying to answer that question. The New York Times, as you guys know, started charging people to come on our website. We believe content is valuable. And we believe that what we do is, we know what we do costs a lot of money. And, you know, I would urge people, I understand the culture of the net is free, but it's not free to have a reporter and a photographer and security and, you know, a clerk in Kabul. You know, it's not free to keep running a Baghdad bureau, even, you know, as American troops are drawn down. And it's not free to staff, you know, the police headquarters in Lower Manhattan for, you know, all day and all night, you know. And so that is the rub. How do we get people? So we're trying out this model of asking people to pay. The Wall Street Journal has had a wall for a long time, and it seems to work okay for them. We find that in charging people to pay for the web, a lot of people are taking a subscription to the newspaper, which is great because there's a lot of us who love newspapers too. There are big organizations like AOL and Patch who think that they have a model in listings and other things like that, and we're all watching them. There are entrepreneurial centers up at CUNY and elsewhere, and even people here at NYU are trying to look at different models. We're in the middle of the revolution. It's not over yet, and it is scary. It is. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not like it's all sorted out, but there's so many of us so committed to figuring this out, and that's all part of this too. If the answer, we actually started at the Times thinking, oh, maybe this is a new business for us, and we quickly realized that with our expenses and our, you know, overhead, it really didn't pay for us to even go out and solicit ads. It really didn't pay. It cost us more to get the ads than the revenue we could bring in. So we have actually, and other people are doing this too, slightly monetized it by. I teach an online course called Community Journalism, and another one that's called, you know, how to be a community contributor. I teach 2 little online courses through the Times Knowledge Network, and that's an online platform that we have, and we give all sorts of different courses. So we've actually been able, as much as I will speak to anybody for free, we also have people who've paid for this course, and that we made a little bit of money. I mean, little bit of money that way. But a lot of people are looking at education, sharing resources, training as another way to. I think the Chicago Tribune just this week started a new venture just like that. So the answer is, I don't know. Anybody else have a question?
Hi, I'm Nadine.
Nice to meet you.
You were saying earlier that there was something that maybe you shouldn't have written about, like in the local. I was just kind of wondering what that was.
I think the thing I regret the most was it just me not thinking, and I would take the full blame. A new restaurant opened, and a community contributor wanted to review the restaurant, and we didn't really give the restaurant a chance to get going and have time, and I don't think the reviewer went there more than once, and it was just stupid. I'm just not familiar with dining reviews. It's not something I've done. I think I made a stupid decision letting them do it. I actually thought about it recently. I wonder what's going on with that restaurant. You know, I don't want to kill off a local business. The writer had a bad experience, but you know, that often happens with a new business. So that's the kind of thing you have to think about the impact. That's one of the things about Hyperlocal. You know, a lot of people think, oh, it's simple, it's small, but you know, I think Hyperlocal is harder than covering the Pentagon in some ways, which is another community, right? The Pentagon is a community, and you have to you got to get things right, and you got to be accurate, because otherwise they won't talk to you again, right? But when you're talking about a neighborhood and people know each other, and you could really hurt a business on the ground, or you can't pull your punch, but you got to be really sure of what you're writing and of your facts and of your information. You've got to think a little bit more, because it does have a real impact on people. So that's the example that comes to mind. That was just a bad decision on my part. I should have stopped that and not published that. Anybody else have a question?
Hi, I'm Mariha.
Hi.
What are the filters you guys use for monitoring what comes in and what you actually put on Hyperlocal? Because there's a lot of inflow, I'm assuming, from the community. So, and how much do you edit of it?
That's a great question. It depends. I will say this, and I maybe Stephen had this experience too. I was pleasantly surprised at the quality, for the most part, of a lot of what came in. We see with the East Village Local, the photographs that are coming in are wonderful, and the blog really has a presence because of that, and they're all community submissions. But there were some people, the gardening columnists, a few people who wrote in New Jersey who were wonderful. There were others who needed a lot of editing. And I often wondered, is this what I'm being paid for, is to sit here and edit this person's, but I guess I was, I got to know the people in the community really well, and they called me directly, and I'd go to events in the community, and a lot of them I still keep in touch with, especially in New Jersey. I've had, them into the office and all. You have to use judgment, and you have to think. In the case of this restaurant review, I don't think we knew that person very well, and that was bad judgment. But we do verify, we ask questions, we kind of bring people along. People do feel part of this. It's funny, there's this community spirit that comes into play here. And people, they're not just looking for a platform. Yes, everybody wants a platform. They want to show off their work, they want to be a writer, they want to be a photographer, whatever. But they also really want to get to know other people in the community. So, and we found that it's kind of extraordinary to me. I really didn't expect that in the least, especially in New York, but maybe more so in New York because people are disconnected in a lot of ways. You live where you find the cheapest, cleanest apartment. I mean, it's as simple as that. But I found that, we had to do fact checking. We did not have as many fact errors as you would think. In fact, there was a long period when I was correcting more intern facts than I was journalism student intern facts than I was anybody in the community, which really surprised me. Now, maybe that's because they were writing about kind of different things. The student journalists were doing real reporting, going out and, kind of finding facts. And people were writing more about what they knew or what they could easily find out. So that's part of it. But, you really have to have your radar up. And that's exactly what went wrong with that restaurant review. When it comes to just general conversation that goes on the site, the New York Times moderates all its comments. And that's why we don't open every story up to comments, because we just can't moderate that many comments on that many different stories. And I think, for the most part, we have a higher quality. It's not just because we have a high quality reader, which we do, but we have a higher quality of discourse because we won't put everything up on there. And we are getting more and more and more selective about that. And in fact, we're going to make the community one of our initiatives is to make the community part of judging which comments should go up. And that's a whole new thing that's going to be evolving. Watch for that. And again, a lot of that comes out of the local. We learned, we were very tough with comments on the local. Because it was local, say someone wrote a really smart comment, but they used a bad word, which you can't use in the New York Times, which we're very stuffy. We're not like the rest of the web. We would actually write to that person and say, we really liked your comment, but you can't use that word. Can you give it back to, we won't edit a comment because, well, we were told if you edit it, you own it, and legally that's not a good thing. That's not really the reason. It's just that you can't edit every comment. That's really the end of it. But we'll send it back, and most times people would resubmit that comment with just that offensive word. Sometimes people would write a string of comments, and we found it offensive because they were attacking another person. I view the local as, the backyard fence. And I don't want people throwing things at each other over the backyard fence. So I'm protective of people who write things, and so we'll be a little more. And sometimes we'll say we're not going to write that because what you're saying is racist, or could be, or you can't call people names. So we'll discourage people from participating. And I found that once you police it a little bit, people get it. And the other thing that's interesting about the web, and I think people have been saying this a long time. I just think I'm an old fogey and just realize this. We learned very quickly with the local that the web is self-policing often, not always. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have all these crazy conspiracy theories out there. But on a small level, people will come in and say, no, that happened. Someone will say, you're wrong, that's, and someone else will come in and say, no, the writer is right. This is what happened. And it's funny. You'll get that conversation going on. So, there's a lot of openness, but on the other hand, we really want to watch what we put up there. We're very protective of our website and our reputation. Who else? At the end of the day, all you have is your integrity. That's it. And if you just remember that all your life, you'll make the right decision all the time. That's all you have. And so we're very protective of our decision making. We're not always right, but we try to be. Anybody else? Pass it along.
Hi, I'm Liz.
Hi, Liz.
I just wanted to know, how do you draw the line as to what would offend the community versus keeping the integrity of the story if an article is opinion-based as a review?
That's a really good question. Well, I'm more concerned about offending the community when it comes to, and the opposite of, promoting things. I don't like to use the New York Times, any part of it, to promote things like businesses or whatever. I just had an exchange of emails with the reporter in Brooklyn who was getting deluged with press releases about a commercial event going in the town. And I just wanted to make sure he understood, in the neighborhood, and I wanted to make sure he understood that, we're very careful, commercial events, the Pepsi challenge, the Pepsi challenge isn't a good idea, but things that are just being done to promote a product, we're not going to do that in the New York Times. So I'm concerned that we keep, that distance. But in terms of, harming, you have to use good judgment. You have to use common sense. We face dilemmas every day. One of the things I love about journalism is nothing is easy. Every story requires you to make numerous decisions, and ethical, moral, factual. Do I believe this or do I believe this? And there's nothing that's easy. Do I quote this person, or what this person said the exact opposite? What do I do? Do I quote them both? So you have to use common sense. If something's really going to hurt somebody, like, it's the same reason we don't out rape victims or sexual abuse victims. You use judgment, because you're not going to name a child who was arrested because it's a child. There's certain rules that we have built in, but day to day you have to adjust to the circumstances and make decisions. Again, I often turn to people around me and will ask, what do you think about this? Should we publish this? How do we? And, luckily I have a lot of wise people around me who've helped me make good decisions and will say, well, maybe if you change this will be okay. But I do think that on the local level, you have to be really, really careful not to pull your punch too much, but then and not to go overboard in writing glorious stories about every single business in the community. No one's going to believe you anyway, and you have a credibility problem. But also to understand that you have a real life impact. And so, they're tough decisions, and I think some of them are situational. Was there any part of that question I didn't answer?
No, I think you have it.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me here. You guys are going to have an amazing experience, and I really wish you well. I'll be looking for your bylines, and I'm really happy that you're here, and thank you for being pioneers.
Thank you.